Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have another video, a very special one. Let's thank our members first over Lady 11B, Cots and Crazy Bull. Thank you for being the full crew members, it helps a lot. Thank you all the Foxbet members, thank you all the Fishbet members, and thank you all the subscribers. We are almost halfway to the 6K, so help me out there, subscribe and join our Discord. We are building a community there to talk about aircraft especially, but everything in games. So yeah, today we are going to talk about the famous Hornet, the F-18 or the FA-18, which is a very well-known aircraft, an amazing aircraft, one of my favorite, if not my favorite American aircraft. If you don't know, I am kind of biased towards Soviet aircraft, but the F-18s, they hit the spot, man. They are very good aircraft. So yeah, basically we are going to, as always, do this video. We are diving down on the aircraft, talking about its history. Then we are going to talk about everything else. And it's not like, oh, the aircraft is coming for War Thunder. It's more of if the aircraft is to come to War Thunder, how it would look like, and what you need to know about the aircraft, the history behind it, and where did it came from, you know? So yeah, we are going to separate the video on first on what it is, then the history of the aircraft a bit, the design and the performance of the aircraft, then the variants that existed, and the variants that can come to War Thunder in my opinion. Okay, so what it is, the McDonnell Douglas, now it's called the Boeing, but yeah, McDonnell Douglas FA-18. It's an all-weather twin-engine, supersonic, carrier-capable, multi-role aircraft. This is the word, you know, multi-role, multi-role, multi-role. This aircraft is one of the best multi-role aircraft out there. It doesn't do anything better than, I mean, it doesn't do air-to-air better than the F-14 or even the F-15, in my opinion, but it does fairly well, you know. And at the same time, it doesn't do air-to-ground better than an A-7 or an A-6, but still it's amazing at that as well. It's right in the middle between those, you know. So it is amazing, but it's kind of the jack of all trades of things. This is a multi-role. This is the definition of multi-role aircraft, you know. It was designed as a fighter and as an attacker. That's the definition of multi-role, right? Designed by McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing, and Northrop as well, together with the McDonnell Douglas company. The F-18 actually came from the YF-17 that we talked a tiny bit about on the F-16 video. Used by several nations, you know, many nations use this aircraft. We're going to talk about it later. And it can do basically all missions as a fighter, air defense, sea, air interdiction, CAS, reconnaissance, anti-ship, cap, basically everything, you know. Due to being a multi-role aircraft, people criticize it back in the day due to have less payloads than the F-14, for example, for air-to-air, and less payloads than the A-6, for example, for the air-to-ground role. But still, I mean, it is very much a smart thinking about doing a multi-role aircraft, especially for carrier-based aircraft, you know, because you don't have a lot of space for many types of different aircraft, you know, and obviously the price as well normally helps a bit, depending on the aircraft, but yeah. Used in many wars, and it was first used in the bombing of Libya in 1986, okay? So yeah, the history of the aircraft. The aircraft design dates back to the early 60s, or basically early 1965. Basically, it was an internal Northrop project called the N300. The program was a derivative from the F5, so it was basically the evolution of the F5. It started as that, featuring a longer fuselage, small leading edge route extensions, and a more powerful engine, the GE-15 J1A1. Turbojets are rated at 40 kilonewtons, so very weak, but it was an improvement over the F5, with a different wing positions to increase ground clearance. But yeah, the N300 was basically developed into the P530, normally called the Cobra, with the G15 engine upgraded to the J1A5, with a very small bypass, so it was basically used for cooling, this bypass, but it was the initial use for more We were going towards the turbofan kind of thing, you know, in the 60s and early 70s. But yeah, it was basically built with cheaper materials than uh, the initial prototypes, you know. So we needed to be a little bit more cooled and stuff like that. So that was the idea behind that engine. And when the LWF program was announced in 1971, this is the program that decided the F-16 was going to be built, you know. Northrop modified the P530 to the P600 design that would be designated once it started, you know, the actual program as the YF-17. It's normally known as the YF-17. You know, the first flight of the F-17 was in 1974, being strictly an air-to-air demonstrator. It didn't even have a proper radar. It was basically just a larger F5 with different designs in the wings and stuff like that. But it was basically the same idea behind it. You know, a light fighter that should basically be a competitor in that program that the F-16 won, you know. The but the development of it was being done step by step during the 60s and the 70s, especially. The gun was moved from below the aircraft to the upper part and used the YJ-101 engine, which was a further development of the GE-15 engine. It basically consumed over 1,000,000 man-hours and 5,000 hours of wind tunnel to be designed. The engines had about 64 kilonewtons, and it was built around aluminiums and some composites. And it competed, as I said, against the YF-16 from General Dynamics, but it lost the program. Eventually lost the program, you know. But in 1974, Navy actually decided to use the hardware and the tech that was developed from the LWF for its own new lightweight strike fighter program. If you remember, the F-14 had just entered in service in this, or was entering in service in this time, and the F-14 was very, very, very expensive. And the idea behind it of the government was the same as in the Air Force, you know, have a lighter aircraft, smaller and cheaper, obviously. So they had the VFAX program. I'm not gonna talk too much about it, but they basically they were skeptical to use the YF-16. Being an aircraft that only had one engine, is problematic to have an aircraft like that over the sea, you know. And also, the landing gear was too narrow. It would make the aircraft maybe topple down in the carrier and stuff like that. So they didn't like the design of the F-16 for a carrier-based aircraft, you know. So they refused the YF-16, and on 1975 the Navy announced the selection of the YF-17 being the winner of this program to be basically the model to be followed and developed into the new aircraft, you know. They basically asked McDonnell Douglas and Northrop to design a new aircraft from the design principles of the YF-17. On 1977, it was announced that this aircraft was to be named the F-18 Hornet. So yeah, McDonnell and Northrop partnered to produce the aircraft, with the manufacturing being split between the companies and McDonnell Douglas having the final inspection done to the aircraft before the service, you know. But yeah, McDonnell was to build the wings, stabilizers, and the forward fuselage, and Northrop was to basically build the center and after fuselage and the vertical stabilizers. McDonnell being the prime contractor for the naval variant, and Northrop wanting to be the prime contractor for the quote-unquote F-18L, which would be a more a land-based variant for export of the F-18. You know, they really wanted to make money, apparently. So yeah, and I don't know if the Rhino name came before this, or after, but it had this Rhino name as well. Not only Hornet, but the pilots call it Rhino. But I didn't catch if it was the Legacy Hornets or the more advanced Super Hornets that we are going to talk about it in another video. So let me know in the comments if you know the difference. Okay. Initially, It was known, this new aircraft was known as the Model 267. It was drastically modified from the YF-17. It had a better airframe, undercarriage, and tailhook to endure the carrier operations. A folding wing design, obviously for the carrier operations as well. Catapult in attachments, and the gear was also widened. With more fuel too, for the Navy range requirements. Larger wing stabilators and a wider fuselage too. The control systems of the YF-17 were completely replaced by a full digital fly-by-wire system, similar to the F-16 one. So yeah, I mean, we are getting into the 80s here, so most aircraft will have fly-by-wires. So yeah, with quadruple redundancy, the first aircraft production fighter to actually have quadruple redundancy on that. The idea was to have 780 aircraft being divided between the F-18A and the A-18A, only different in avionics to be, I mean, the attack variant and the fighter variant. And then the TF-18A, a twin seat with the same capabilities as the F-18, but with less fuel, but with less fuel and another guy on the back, you know. So yeah. With improvements in avionics and the MFD and stuff like that, a decision was made to make the F and the A into one aircraft. And starting in 1980, it was named the FA-18A. It was officially announced as that in 1984. Okay, and the TF-18A was renamed FA-18B. We're going to talk about it later, the variants, but that was the initial naming. An export model was tried to be made with lighter materials and without a carrier-based capability, as I said before, for export, you know. But after some lawsuits and some problems between McDonnell Douglas and Northrop, basically by the time they fixed that, most customers were selecting the F-16, so it was cancelled. Okay, the F-18L. It was probably going to get another name in the future, but still. It was to be the land-based variant, right? It had some problems with cracks and stuff like that during the 80s, but even in 1984, it had the fleet being grounded until the problem were fixed. So yeah, they were being produced, but at early stages they were having problems and getting back to the drawing board, and this is commonly known by in engineering, you know. So yeah, the first flew in 1978, the F-18A, with the first FA-18A production model that first flew in 1980. Okay, and in 1987 the production shifted to the FA-18C, and later its life received major overhauls called the Super Hornet, that we're going to talk about it in another video. You know, it was used in by many nations: the US, Australia, Canada, Finland, Kuwait, Malaysia, Spain, Switzerland, and it was used in many wars, including the Gulf War and many others. It's an aircraft that was the idea. You know, it was a further development of the F5, and it was just basically that idea, but it was so developed that became the F-18, you know. So yeah, pretty interesting. And started the production, as I said, in 1980. The service life also 1980, with the first squadrons receiving the aircraft during that time as well. So it's basically around the same time as the MiG-29, and I'm going to compare it a lot to the MiG-29 because I think even though the F-15 can be comparable to the MiG-29 and the F-16 too in some areas, the F-18 is the aircraft that is most comparable to it, you know, even though initially the MiG-29 is not a carrier-based aircraft, but still. So yeah, basically this is the basic history behind the aircraft, okay? And then we're going to talk about the design and the performance of the aircraft. The F-18 was very much an evolution of the F-5 in mission and in design, with the YF-17 kind of being a bridge to that gap of ideas, you know. It is designed as a multi-role aircraft, as I said, so it does basically everything. But obviously, like the A7 and A6 will do ground attack missions better, the F-14 will do fleet defense better than the F-18 as well. But the point of the F-18 was to be cheaper than the F-14 and doing everything in a good manner, you know. It's not supposed to be anything incredible, but it is incredible in its own way, doing everything, you know. Trying to put the multi-role name to the test, basically, you know. So yeah, it is twin engine, and as I said at the beginning of the video, and they had a very close, the engines very close to each other due to problems in when you lost one engine. You know, the F-14 had a problem with that, so they decided to just put the engine very close to each other, just like the F5, right? Initially used the GE F404 engine, formerly known as the YJ101. That was formerly known as the GE 15. So it was an evolution of the engine that we first saw on the P530 prototype, you know. So yeah, close to the same thrust as the J79. To be honest, the thrust is basically the same, but it is half the weight, which is also an amazing thing. 1/3 shorter than the J79, and 40% less parts to deal with, you know, and about 4 times more reliable than the old F4 engines, the J79. So it was also smokeless, and it had an onboard fire extinguisher added to the engine. It was a low bypass turbofan. Okay, so it was a very much improvement over the J79, you know. So yeah, a very good engine. It was very reliable as well. With the 402 version of this engine, because I'm talking about this 402 version because this is the 1992 variant of the engine, because I couldn't find the power of the initial GE 404 engines, but basically they had 78 kilonewtons in 1992, so I'd guess it has around 60 something kilonewtons on the 80s, you know. So yeah, it has a mid-wing design, being highly maneuverable, and it has an amazing thrust weight and a fly-by-wire system, and it's basically highly maneuverable due to that, you know. It has slotted flaps and ailerons over the entire span of the wing, and I couldn't find comparable, you know, at the time of the introduction of the aircraft, the AOA numbers to compare to the MiG-29, but I'd say they should be similar or surpass the MiG-29 by at least 2 degrees maybe, or something like that. Once I saw something about it, but I couldn't confirm via proper source, you know. So it was a very good on a dogfight, you know. Although he had a worse thrust weight than the MiG-29, in the AOA department it should be equal or better than that, you know. I'm not talking about the C variant against an early MiG-29 that a lot of people like to compare even the E and the F, the Super Hornets, to the early MiG-29s that the German had. So yeah, we're not comparing that. We're comparing the F-18A with the MiG-29A, okay? The 912, but the 913 as well. So they are theoretically, in a rate fight, the MiG-29 should win, but I think it depends very much on the pilot. But in normal fights, according to German and US and Swiss pilots, the MiG-29 should win in the dogfight in a continuous turn with the AOA that the F-18 can pull. So in the short turns, you know, in the first turns, second turns, the F-18 could theoretically have an advantage, but minor, you know. In the performance itself, the normal climb rate for the C variant should be around 250 meters per second, so very close to the F-15, with a max speed of Mach 1.8, so fairly good speed, and a service ceiling of 15,000 meters, which is, yeah, pretty alright for such an aircraft. Normally, in a gross weight kind of situation, you would have a thrust weight of around 0.96, which is around 0.2 higher than the Mirage 2000, and around the same for the F-14, better than the F-14, you know, the A. But if used weapons plus only 50% of the fuel, it can be achieved a 1.13 thrust weight. Compared to the MiG-29, for example, it is inferior. The MiG-29 could achieve around 1.09 with a gross weight, but still, it is not by much. It is a little bit superior, you know. But it is way superior than the Mirage 2000 and the F-14 and the MLD, for example, to have a comparable aircraft in the game that we can talk about, you know. It had multiple sensors, but obviously the main one is the APG-65. It is the pulse Doppler radar made by Hughes. It is called normally as the multi-mode pulse Doppler radar. It has acquire modes for dogfights like the F-14. It has also the high PRF modes similar to the MiG-29 for hot targets, and TWS for high and medium PRFs that can track 10 targets basically, 8 to 10 targets. And when he added the AIM-120 on the arsenal, he could have the capability to just fire as many missiles that he could carry. So if he could carry 6 missiles, he could fire 6 missiles, you know. The range of the improved APG-73 was around 160 kilometers. So I'd guess, I couldn't find a proper source for this, but I'd guess the range on the APG-65 for a normal fighter range target would be around the same as the F-15 radar and the MiG-29 and the Su-25, Su-27. It would be around 100 kilometers, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but around 100 kilometers, which is enough, you know. But yeah, as I said, difficult to find proper sources for that. It could also carry the FLIR pods with thermals, and basically the radar also could detect ships, ground targets. It could map the ground and for attacks and navigations. So the radar was very, very modern at the time. It has a digital processor that can compute a lot of things. So yeah, it's a very, very modern radar in the sense of multi-role, and especially in the sense of ground radars. It was very, very advanced. As the air-to-air, I think it was comparable to the others, but there's nothing too crazy. All these radars of all these aircraft, the F-15, the Su-27, the MiG-29, they will always have TWS, high PRF modes, and basically acquire modes and stuff like that. So yeah, in the air-to-air, it's comparable, but in air-to-ground, the F-15 don't have an air-to-ground mode. The comparable models for the time. MiG-29 doesn't have for the comparable variants of the time. Su-27 as well. So basically, it is one of the only fighters of these aircraft that have these air-to-ground mode. You know, so it is fairly modern and pretty good. It is a very, very multi-role radar. Everything is multi-role in this aircraft. It was a very, very reliable radar. With multiple modes that can be used for both an air-to-ground, and it was later upgraded with the APG-73 in the 90s. Okay, it has a very, very modern HUD as well, a very good RWRs, flares and chaff. Couldn't find the amount of it, but it's enough, I guarantee. In the cockpit, the main avionics are with 3 MFD screens, you know, using the cathode ray tubes technology. Obviously very old technology for now, but it was very modern at the time, and even a bit ahead of its time, you know. Not a lot of aircraft use that. It was light, nimble, fast accelerating, like very fast accelerating, with a very good climb rate, and which made it a very deadly opponent. In the weapons department, the F-18 can carry basically anything that the US had. For air-to-air, the Vulcan was to be used, obviously, mounted on the nose with 578 rounds, with the ability to shoot AIM-7s as well and AIM-9s as well. The AIM-7s would be the AIM-7Fs and Ms, and later the AIM-120 as well in the late 80s and early 90s. The AIM-9s would be the AIM-9L at first and AIM-9M as well, but I think it probably could carry the AIM-9H as well. It normally carried on basically 2 loadouts in the air-to-air combat, 2 AIM-9s and 4 AIM-7s, or 6 AIM-9s with a double stack in the middle pylon and 2 AIM-7s in the fuselage pylons. For the air-to-ground role, it could carry anything dumb that the US had, so any dumb bombs and rockets, so Mark 80 series, anything like that, rockets, even nuclear bombs. And the guided department, it could carry laser guided stuff as well as TV guided stuff, so the walleye bomb, TV guided missiles like the Maverick, and basically with upgrades as well, even IR versions of the Maverick. The GBU-8, it could carry the laser guided GBU-12, the GBU-24, anything like that, and it could designate its own targets with its FLIR pod. Okay, so it has the FLIR pod that could help the radar. I mean, the radar could detect even some ground targets, depending on the ground target that it is. And together with the FLIR pod, it can, designate targets and basically use the laser. And even some other stuff like the AGM-84 anti-ship missiles, the Harpoon, and the AGM-88 anti-radiation missile. So it can do basically anything, anti-ship, anti-seed, anything. Locating sea targets with its radar, obviously, and you use the AGM-84 to kill them. So it was very capable of destroying any target. The USN retired its legacy Hornets in 2019, but the USMC still has them, and it's in a procedure of upgrading it to have an EASA radar, the APG-79V4. So yeah, it's being upgraded until this day, and many nations use it until this day. Some kind of a quote-unquote, my personal opinion over here, okay? A combat between an F-18A and the MiG-29A 913, or even the 912, because the 913 just has ECM and a little bit more range, so it doesn't change much from the original aircraft. The F-18 would basically win in the range that the aircraft can fly. Obviously, this is the main problem with the MiG-29. The radar range is supposedly to be a little bit better, at least 20 kilometers better in the fighter-sized detection. Obviously, in the air-to-ground role, the MiG-29, especially these early variants, only carry the dump and bombs and rockets, and especially the instantaneous AOA. I couldn't confirm this, but the sources that I had said that the initial AOA of the F-18 is better than the MiG-29. But yeah, while the MiG would probably win in a dogfight in the continuous turn kind of situation, the thrust weight of the MiG-29 would win eventually, together with the HMD, obviously the helmet-mounted display, together with R-73s. It becomes a very deadly weapon. So yeah, climb and speed, more energy. Basically, the MiG-29 would have more energy to deal with this situation in a 1v1 in a dogfight, And together with the HMD that I told you about, it is a very deadly opponent for the F-18 in a dogfight. While in the BVR, I think the R-27 is better than the AIM-7F and very much comparable to the AIM-7M. So it depends on the missile that it will receive. So basically, it depends on the missile, but if we got the R-27 and the AIM-7M, it would be down to the radar. And the radar, I think the F-18 had a little bit more range. So the initial advantage of the F-18 would go to the F-18, But it is kind of marginal because, I mean, you having 100 kilometers or 80 kilometers or 90 kilometers that the MiG-29 have of fighter-sized targets, it doesn't change much. So in the BVR, I think it's more the advantage. It is on the F-18 side, but not too much. It's more on the ability that the F-18, this initial F-18 already could carry 4 Sparrows, and the MiG-29s initially could carry only 2 R-27s. It's more that than anything else, but they are very much a very comparable aircraft, to be honest. I think in the dogfight, the MiG-29 is superior. And the F-18, but the F-18 is not that far back, to be honest. And in the BVR, the F-18 would be a bit more, a bit better in the BVR, but not by much as well. So they are very much comparable to each other. I think they might be even good to be coming together, Even though we already have the F-14, which kind of becomes a balancing problem, but still, this is my opinion, okay? On these aircraft. Obviously, I'm comparing the first MiGs with the first F-18s, okay? We're not comparing 90 stuff with 19 stuff. If we were to compare the F-18C, we would need to compare it to the MiG-29M, for example, that it didn't see properly a proper production until it became the MiG-35. And then we already have the Hornet C, So if the Soviet Union didn't collapse, I don't like to do this, but if the Soviet Union didn't collapse, we would be comparing the F-18C and the MiG-29M probably. But since the Soviet Union collapsed, let's just compare the initial variants for both of them, and it's kind of more reasonable to compare, especially because we will probably see these variants first in the game. Okay, so these are the designs and the performance of the aircraft and overall performance. Let's talk quickly about the variants because the video is already 30 minutes. So yeah, first of all, obviously the FA-18A single seat initial version. Basically, everything that I said before, it is basically this aircraft. It was used like that, as I said, until 1992 when used an upgraded APG-73 radar, as I said. It has just basically much more capabilities, and including the A120, and it's normally designated the F-18A plus, So this is the first single-seat initial version. Then we have the FA-18B, which is a two-seat versions of the A. It had 6% less fuel because you had to be removed one of the fuel tanks for the second pilot. Normally used for training, but it has the same capabilities in fights and stuff like that, and it received the same upgrades to the F-18A. Okay. Then in 1987 we got the FA-18C upgraded A version, so it is single seat. Upgraded radar, avionics, being able to carry the M120, later the AGM-84E SLAM, and the IR version of the AGM-65, the F variant. I think we have the D variant as well, but I don't remember if it was used in this one. But still, better radar modes for ground mapping, and in 1989 it received even a thermal nav pod, the AAR-50, NVDs, better FLIR pods, and two full-colored MFDs along its life, even with a color moving map. In 1992, also received an engine upgrade. All the F-18s received an engine upgrade with 10% increase in its power, more pods, better systems for designations of targets, and the production ended in 2000. Okay, FA-18D, two-seat version of the C, same upgrades, everything the same. So basically, we have the A, APG-65, then we have the C, late 80s, better radar, as I said, comparable to something like the MiG-29M, but yeah. Then we have the D, two-seat version of the C. Then we have the FA-18 DRC, which is basically the same aircraft as the D, but instead of the M61 Vulcan, it has in its place an ATARS electro-optical sensor package for reconnaissance. 60 of them were built. Okay, so these are the models: the A, B, C, D, and we have the A plus, the B plus, and then the DRC. So these are the variants before we got the E and the F, that I'm going to make a proper video talking about them because they're way too different. But yeah, and we have some export designations. Let's just pass it over quickly. We have the FA-18A, which is the Australian variant of the A. It lacks the catapult attachment, replaces the tail hook with a lighter resting hook, and the lack of automatic landing systems of the carrier. And it had many upgrades over the years, like F-18C avionics and stuff like that. So it is basically just a land version of the F-18A for the Australians. Then we have the AF-A-18B, which is the Australian variant of the B, with the same kind of package. We have the CF-188A and the CF-188B, which are the designation of the F-18A and B for the Canadian Air Force. We have the EF-18A, or locally called the C-15, which is the Spanish version of the normal A, the single-seat A. It was upgraded to the A plus in 92, same as the US ones. Upgraded with F-18C avionics. It had many upgrades over the years. Used the same armaments as in the US, basically Mavericks and other stuff. It received a domestic upgrade as an MLU package for better avionics, better data buses, data representations in the MFDs, nav systems, comms, ECMs, and more. And this was between 2004 and 2013. And later, he received even a better version of the APG-65, the V3 variant, a better RWR certified to operate the IRST, Meteor, GBU-48, and the Taurus weapon systems, with overhauls in the engines and the fuselage, and a new paint for a few units as well. It is these more modern upgraded versions are normally called the EF-18 MLU or the C-15M. In Spanish, it's called C because it's caza, so it's basically the hunter, you know, or the hunt. So it would basically mean uh, some. I mean, in Portuguese and in Spanish, we normally call these aircraft not a fighter, but a hunter, basically, in this translation, you know. So we call it a caça or uh, caça, which is one hunter, basically. So yeah, and it's this more modern version is considered better than the C variant. Obviously, having Meteor missiles and IRSTs. I mean, yeah. And then obviously they have the EF-18B as well, or the CE-15, which is the very version of the F-18 with the same upgrades for Spain as well. We have the KAF-18C and D, which are the Kuwaitian designations for the aircraft, and some of the C's and D's were made basically in a shared program with the US and Finland as well, with domestic upgrades made in Finland, MLU packages and stuff. Switzerland has also received its own variant of the C and D, and it had upgrades done to it, MLU upgrades, you know. But basically this is it, you know. These are the main variants, the A, B, C, D. A and C always being the single seat, B and D always being the twin seat. And then we have some other designations depending on the country. Obviously, we always have that. As you see, for example, my country called the Gripen, not the JAS 39 or the JAS 39 or the J39. We call it the F39. Even the Mirage 3 that we used, it was called the F103, if I'm not mistaken. So each country has its own designations, you know. So yeah. And then the last part of the video, let's wrap it up this. The variants that can come to War Thunder. First, the Tech 3 variants, I think we should see two types of line of thinking, you know. One of them would be under the F-14 and one of them under the A-7. Being a multi-role aircraft, it can be under both of these aircrafts. Let me know in the comments what you think is best. So first of all, under the F-14, we would have the F-14A early, and then after that the F-18A. Okay, then an F-14A late, in my opinion, with A9Ls, better stuff like that. Then an F-14B, because I still think that the F-14B would be far less capable than the F-18C, because the F-18C, I think it should be coming together with AIM-120s when it comes, you know. So since the F-14B doesn't have that, it would come the F-14A early, F-18A, then the F-14A late, then the F-14B, or even not the F-18A late, but directly to the F-14B, you know, for less grind, and then an F-18C with the AIM-120. After that, I don't know, maybe the F-18AE or F or something like that. We're going to do a video on that in the future as well. Or we can have it on the attacker line. So we could have it the A7E. After that, I think it would be fair to have the AV-8B NA, which is basically the same aircraft as the Harrier GR7. Then the F-18A, instead of being under the F-14A early, would be the F-18A under the AV-8B NA. And then after that, the AV-8B Plus, when we have AIM-120s in the game. And after that, the F-18C. So, since it's an aircraft that it is a fighter but also an attacker, it could be put it on the naval line or on the attacker line, or even on a sideline together with the F-14s going downwards, you know, but I doubt that they will do that. As a premium or events or extra F-18s that we can see, I would say basically two of them could come. Personally, I would like to see the Australian AF-A-18A with the different things that he had. It is probably a little bit better in the performance in the sense of dogfights and stuff, because it is a little bit lighter, but still. Or even the CF-188A, but it basically would be the same as the F-80, the A variant, so I don't know. Or even two other variants that can add more as an event vehicle than anything else, because there's no reason to add it, but maybe they could. It is the B or the D variants as well, the B placed versions. Not much into it. I mean, there's no reason to it, but to just be fun, you know. So I personally think that the two-seat versions are way cooler in the looks, you know, of it. So I would get it just because it looks better than the A, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know, you know. But anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about this. These are my opinions on the variants that can come to War Thunder and the way that it would be introduced in the game. They would have every armament that I told you about initially, the AIM-7F, and AIM-7M, AIM-9L, AIM-9M, stuff like that. The Vulcan, it is doable. I think it's an aircraft that it would be needed to be a counter, you know. It would need a MiG-29 to be a counter, Su-27, something like that, or even better, or other aircraft, you know. But it would be nice to see. I'm not saying it should be added right now, because the US already has the F-14. So remember when I say this, the US already have the F-14, so they don't need the F-18 right now. Okay, this is just a diving down video for when the F-18 comes. It will come at some point. And last thing, I didn't put the F-18 as the Australian premium for the UK because no, okay, no. They will have their own aircraft, and the Americans have their own aircraft, and the Russians have their, you know. The only nations that can have these type of thing are nations that don't have anything else, like the Germany's, for example. It has only the Tornado and the MiG-29, so it needs to have one of those, you know. So yeah, but basically this is it. Let me know in the comments what you think about the F-18, if you like it or not, and I see you guys on the next one. So bye guys, subscribe. It takes a lot of work to do these videos, so subscribe.